right up. Soylent Green. Soylent Green right here.
Please join me in a warm welcome for Dr. P.K. Newby.
When it comes right down to it, food is practically the whole story every time. When it comes right down to it, food practically is the whole story every time. What better way to open tonight's Science on Screen event focused on the future food than with one of my favorite quotes by Kurt Vonnegut. Truth be told, actually I open many of my talks and presentations and lectures with exactly that quote because it always pertains. Food practically is the whole story the whole time, and we'll talk a little bit about that in my introduction to tonight's film. You can see from the slide here that I've titled my talk tonight, From Farm to Fork, What We Eat Matters. And what we'll do is reflect on the past, ponder the present, before we end my introduction by glimpsing on the future of food. Because of course we need to understand a little bit where we came from and where we are today to take a look and to think about what we might be eating in the many, many years, decades, and even hundreds of years from now into the future. I'm not going to spend any of our very, very precious time tonight talking about myself. You just heard about that wonderful and generous introduction. Thank you very much for that. And if you want to find me, you can just Google me, go to any of my links, and you'll find out all about what I do. As you heard, I spend most of my time talking about why what we eat matters, farm to fork, and I'm a nutrition scientist and food writer. So let's jump right in here. Where are we coming from? Where are we coming from? This graphic sort of nicely depicts what I'm going to go through in about a few million years of human history in the next few minutes or so. Essentially, once we came down from the trees, our earliest years was in the Paleolithic era, the Stone Age, where we acted mainly as hunter-gatherers to obtain food and feed. So-called the Stone Age, as you well know, because we developed stone tools, which enabled us not only to hunt food, but also to eat it more easily. That was about 2.6 million years ago. Fast forward to our much, 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 much more recent history, more like a blip, about 8 to 12,000 years ago before present, we entered the Neolithic period. That was basically when the birth of agriculture began. That was in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East. During that time, we first began domesticating animals as well as plants for human consumption. This is where we come back again to that wonderful statement by Kurt Vonnegut, because food is the whole story every time. Not only do we need it to live, to survive, but it is through that development of agriculture that we're able to develop the tools and technology, not only to better grow food, but to allow us to store it and of course eventually to trade it. This type of movement that happened that we're talking about right now during the Neolithic period forever changed our relationship between food, animals, and plants. Now, fast forward many, 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 many more years from then. Now we're talking about essentially a blip on the screen of human history, what would be nanoseconds essentially if you thought about it. If you think about the past several hundred years, let's say the 18th and 19th century, we underwent additional revolutions in terms of changing our relationship with food. Through the industrial revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries that occurred both in Europe as well as here, of course, that are currently going on in the developing world. After that, what happened here is we underwent the Green Revolution, which led to major, major increases in crops and our productivity with regards to agriculture. Through the efforts of Norman Borlaug and others, those efforts led to such major increases in crop yield that it is thought to have saved 1 billion lives due to prevention of hunger. That happened around the middle of the 20th century or so, and then of course after that we had the genetic revolution, now the digital revolution, which is continuing as we speak to change our relationship with food. A really nice graphic that talks about the 20 big inventions in food and drink was put together by the Royal Society in the UK a few years back. You can see refrigeration tops the list. Anyone who remembers, whether it's their parents, their grandparents, their great-parents, that those days of yore when you had an icebox, that really wasn't that long ago, but we now are able to enjoy food in our own homes because of refrigeration. You can look to my blog or other places to go through this list, but each of these tools and technologies has changed our relationship with food, our ability to store it, our ability to enjoy it, and our ability to cook and feed each other with it. At the same time that we've enjoyed these wonderful, wonderful advances in our ability to grow food and to consume it, as we've just discussed, we've had alongside with it many changes in the health and demographic issues that we face currently in the world. I will quickly recap them before getting on to the future of food. Essentially, what we have is a global obesity epidemic. The pink is where there's 24 to 25% or more obese in the world. If you include overweight in that category, it's about 1.2 billion people that suffer from what is essentially, of course, a preventable disease. Alongside its other diseases that are related to overweight, such as chronic diseases of coronary heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and so forth, these diseases are chronic diseases that are essentially modifiable through lifestyle factors such as physical activity and, of course, diet. At the same time that we face our global obesity crisis, we still face hunger and malnutrition. Our projections for hunger were a little bit better than we expected this year, happily, but they still are hovering at about 828 million people. Of course, the majority of those are women and children. If you include those who are malnourished, meaning those who suffer from nutrient deficiencies, such as vitamin A, iodine, iron, zinc, which leads to early death, as well as nutritional blindness and other very serious problems, of course, that influence mainly children, that's an additional billion people. So we're talking about more than 3 billion of the world's populations are currently malnourished or have inadequate food and nutrition in some way. At the same time, we waste about 30 to 50% of the food, depending on where you are in the world. Obviously, what I feel is not only a moral crisis, but also a crisis of many other problems when it regards to that food waste ends up in our landfills, which further contributes to global warming. 1 billion of us lack safe and clean water, which of course is relevant for life as well, necessary for life. In addition to all of these human health problems, we have a whole host of environmental problems, which is why I spend my time saying, hey, nutrition, guess what? It's not just about you. Yes, it's great to think about how food impacts our own personal health. It also impacts our shared environment, our planet. The issues that I've listed up there on the screen are, of course, just a small example, just a few of the problems that we have in our environment today related to how food is grown. So, of course, that leads us to a question as to how we feed about 9 billion people in 2050. That is the question many, many, many people, scientists like myself, nonprofits, all kinds of governments and groups are wondering how we're going to feed this massive population. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations estimates that we will need 70% more food, and guess what? Half of that needs to be grown in the developing world. So, Soylent Green. Soylent Green. Well, if we read that description, the year is 2022. The population of New York City has exploded to over 40 million residents, crammed into tiny apartments and battling for food, while the wealthy hoard meat, fruit, and vegetables that have not survive on factory-made food produced by a corporate monolith whose latest product is the mysterious Soylent Green. Well, you know what? It really doesn't take a scientist or a genius to think that, you know what, that image and that description isn't that far off from where we are today. We can just replace our images of the prior image, in case you haven't seen the movie. I don't want to give anything away. You can replace those images with those of our CAFOs, which are known as concentrated animal feeding operations, and we see our pigs, we see our poultry, we see our cattle, we see the factory workers putting the food together, and we can just simply sort of paraphrase and say the year is 2015 or even 22, not that much is going to change between now and then, and you can read the rest of what I've written there, and you can see that it really is pretty reflective as to what is going on really almost now. And this is not even to say anything of the many, many images you'll see in the movie that also reflect pretty massive environmental degradation. No, it's not a dystopia in this world yet. It doesn't exactly look like that, but it certainly is a movie that speaks to our current times for sure, which is why I proposed it to the Coolidge here many months ago, and I'm so happy that they were interested in showing it and that all of you are here to see it. So let's move on a little bit, and I'll get to the present and the future of food before getting to our film. Well, so Soylent Green, perhaps we don't have that, but we do have Soylent. Perhaps you caught it in the news over the summer. It is now on the market. I don't know what the ingredients are, but I won't lie, it doesn't look very tasty to me, but it does purport to meet all your nutritional needs. I won't digress, but I think that is not clear whether it actually does or not, because I spent a lot of time thinking about food science and technology in my life, as you've heard. Nonetheless, we have a strong interest in meaning we, all of us here in the developed world, as well as increasingly around the world, for nutrition that is convenient for us, okay? And our need for taste as well. So let's go to a couple more things before moving to our movie. What are we eating now? Okay, before we talk about the future. Well, I'm not going to go through this. You all know what you should be eating. Most people do. Why don't we? That's a different story. But in the meantime, although nutritionists sort of wish you were eating those things, what we're really eating is something that looks a little bit more like this. We have an incredible appetite for fat, sugar, salt, and guess what? Those